So what changed? In 13 years, what wound up changing in 2005? Was it them reaching out to you, or who had the change of heart? Who saw the potential, I should say, of adding in those suspended chords into a metal framework?
Some promoters.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the podcast that gives Gen X music maniacs a chance to smell like teen spirit again by connecting with the brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 3 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Alex Skolnick in an interview that manages to shred more expectations than it does batshit crazy riffage. This is part 2 of the interview, aka the better of the two halves. In this episode, Alex talks with Discograffiti about whether he prefers the classic early Testament records or the later stuff, his search for more adventurous musical landscapes, and the resistance it initially caused within the band, and the most ambitious project upon which he's ever embarked, the absolutely amazing Planetary Coalition. Coming up, we've got Mike Watt rating the entirety of the Minutemen's output, Mark Robinson from Unrest rating everything he's ever done, Robert Schneider from the Apples in Stereo rating everything he's ever done, and Will Hart from the Olivia Tremor Control rating everything they ever did. Oh, and Michelle Phillips rating everything she's ever done, alongside Mamas and Papas author Richard C. Campbell, who's written a brand new book about him getting kinda itchy. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And for premium membership benefits that'll make you ask yourself, how's it even humanly conceivable that this is all the work of one man and one man alone? Just visit patreon.com/discograffiti. We've got 100 episodes available exclusively on Patreon, and that number, as well as the Discograffiti Inner Circle, is growing exponentially by the day. That's patreon.com/discograffiti. And away we go then. As lead guitarist and songwriter for Testament, tonight's guest was at the forefront of the second wave of thrash metal in the late 80s. In a 2021 Revolver magazine fan poll, his band was voted best non-Big Four thrash act. More on that later. The shadow of his influence has fallen hard and heavy over the years, certainly unmistakable in the music of Pantera, Sepultura, White Zombie, Korn, Lamb of God, and so many others. Guitar World magazine named him one of the greatest guitarists of all time, and they know their shit because it says it right there in the title. Lads and ladies, snatch up your top secret documents and start shredding, because an arpeggio flurry is about to rain down on your shriveled excuse for a collective soul. It's Alex Skolnick.
What an intro. I don't even know if I can follow that.
Well, let's just end it here then.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, all those guys, they're really good and they showboat and they deserve to, but it's just not for me, and I don't hear the emotion. For you, my favorite song you have ever written, and I've heard everything, is "Oh Free."
Oh, wow. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh Free is my absolute favorite song by you, which is on Goodbye to Romance, which I've heard 10, 15 times within the space of a couple days. And you never let go of the idea that even though I can hit these notes and I've mastered this thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that the emotion's just going to drip out of it.
Yeah. On that recording, that was my first foray into original songs. After that, every album had more and more original tracks, but I was so new to composing. So I was more focused on arranging. That's why I had all these arrangements of hard rock songs.
For those who don't know the history, from 1992 to 2005, you jumped out of a plane without a parachute. And then in 2005, you get to water all of your seeds of influence. 2005 to the present, you're back in Testament. And so as I'm listening to all your material, and by the way, I actually like the later stuff better. There's something about the way that it hits in a much more forceful manner. It feels like a real battering ram. Maybe because of the 80s production, there's a...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. People know how to record this type of music now.
It's fucking pummeling. It's punishing.
Yeah, back then it was such a new thing. Yeah, it was very hard to get it produced well. There aren't that many well-produced records of very heavy music from back then. It's one thing that set Metallica apart. I mean, they were just really good at recording that music. And yeah, they really had a really nice vision for it. Slayer started sounding really good once Rick Rubin came on board. But, I mean, in my opinion, yeah, even the first couple Megadeth records, although the material's awesome, it's priceless material. To me, yeah, the production, no comparison to how they would sound later on. And now, they have an amazing sound. Yeah, I think part of it is just, everybody sort of learned how to record this music. So I agree. I like the later music better. And it's fun to play the older songs live because everything sounds so much better.
This is a question that was definitely haunting me through listening to everything from 2005 on is, are you trying to restrain yourself? Because now you've unlocked this suspended chords and all these, what Joni Mitchell would call chords of inquiry. So,
right.
So do you have to restrain yourself and hold yourself back?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say hold myself back. I would say there are some ideas that I try that I decide against using in the long run because it's just too much. It's not an instrumental rock album. It's, it might work on a Stu Hamm recording, for example, or the project I have with Percy Jones from Grand X or something like that. No, I want it to fit with Testament. But that said, I do manage to sneak in some ideas that I think sound a little different.
The slowing down, the more melodic approaches, like on The Ritual in 92, is that them saying, okay, you can, have your cake and eat it too? And then you were like, you know what, it's just not enough of this kind of stuff. I need it to be all of this kind of stuff. Is that what happened there, or am I reading into it?
A little bit. I think a lot of it's just bad communication on my part, as much as anybody else's. There was pressure to just always solo over these riffs that were too busy, going a million miles an hour, and it just didn't feel adequate to express anything. The occasional more slowed down solo, like Souls of Black or Electric Crown or Return to Serenity, which are ones that people bring up often to this day. So, there was a huge fight just to get those even try, and usually in the studio, it was somebody, an engineer or producer or somebody that would say, oh, that's staying on the record. You guys want to get rid of that? You guys are
right. Was it everyone in the band who was against the idea of not watering it down with jazz chords, but sort of beefing it up in a different direction? Were they all hesitant?
No, but I think Eric Peterson, with great respect, because I understand he started the band. And by that point, we're doing the band, but the singer always gets a lot of attention. And then I'm getting all this attention. And he was kind of more like a Malcolm Young. He was the guy holding it together who'd started it. But that was creating some tension. And I think also the fact that when he started the band, he was inspired by Motorhead, Slayer, Venom, these sort of really hardcore extreme metal bands at the time.
Almost cartoon-like.
Yeah. And with almost like a more garage rock mentality. I love Motorhead.
Yeah, they're great.
You don't talk about the solos. It's not something you listen to for the solos.
Right.
I think it got a little weird that, okay, here's Testament, that the vision originally was a band like that. Suddenly the solos are getting all this attention. So there was that, but also, from my point of view, I just wanted things to be more musically interesting. I just thought, we're doing so much stuff. It sounds like stuff we've done. It sounds like stuff other people are doing. Let's make things more colorful. Let's try different keys. Let's try different chords, different harmonies. There's so much we could do. There was a lot of resistance. So I think by 92, I was pretty fed up. I know there were other tensions going on within the band that had nothing to do with me. And I was just tired of it being a fight to get musically interesting ideas recorded.
So what changed? In 13 years, what wound up changing in 2005? Was it them reaching out to you, or who had the change of heart? Who saw the potential, I should say, of adding in those suspended chords into a metal framework?
Some promoters.
It's always the fucking promoters.
The promoters that thought if we get the original lineup of Testament back together, even if it's just for a weekend of shows, that would be exciting. We got an offer to play in Europe. I think it was the Dynamo Festival, which had been the first festival the band had ever played at. So it was kind of historically significant. And at that point, there were several other factors.
But you got along and it worked.
We were getting along again. We'd worked out some business issues, like their people had talked to my people, and, there were some business things cleared up. And then once that happened, it seemed like the last thing anybody would expect, because by 2005, I've got a few of my instrumental albums out. I'm definitely more on that path.
You're in a whole new mindset. I mean, anyone who's following your career is got to be shocked.
Right. I was the guy that used to do this thrash metal stuff, and now I got a music degree, and
Which, by the way, is not that shocking. I mean, the music you played in Testament, it's not like it was simple.
Right.
It's just complex in a different way.
Yeah. But also, by 2005, I knew how to play with a saxophone player. I knew how to play with a piano player. If I got called for a recording session that was more pop or some other style, like I knew what I was doing. I was a full-time professional. I didn't care what kind of music it was.
Yeah, like Jimmy Page from 65 to 67 or something.
Yeah, I guess for me, it was kind of like the reverse.
Right.
I was doing studio stuff. Nothing especially noteworthy, but on a professional level. Yeah, and I was touring with my group, and the guys came around to the shows, which was fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it was fun, and it was a cool thing, and they enjoyed meeting the guys in my instrumental band and vice versa. And it's just, so the vibes were really good. Yeah, I think also I did a guest track for the band Lamb of God.
You did one solo, right?
Yes. Really enjoyed it.
The title track of Ashes of the Wake.
Called Ashes of the Wake, yeah.
Yeah.
A short time after that, they came around and played in New Jersey for one of the Ozfest. So at that point, Ozfest is happening. And Ozfest really helped reignite heavy metal in a lot of ways. In some ways, it never went away. In Europe, it certainly never went away. But in the U.S., suddenly you have this touring festival that, was a big deal. And everybody from Ozzy to Black Sabbath to Judas Priest on the higher end of the scale to groups that were going to be headliners in the future, like Lamb of God and Slipknot. Slipknot, I think they were already well on their way. But I saw all these bands. I saw what was happening then. Just the response I got and just the appreciation from the other band. It was just amazing. A lot of them had listened to Testament when they were younger. A lot of them were familiar with my instrumental stuff, too, at least the guitar players.
What I love is before 2005, you were getting more and more outre before you got back into the band. So, you have Stratusferius, which is just batshit crazy in the best way. And so Ofri Aliaz, talk about unexpected. Their Judeo-Spanish songs, it's sort of Middle Eastern vibe to it. So different from anything else you'd ever lent your talents to before. And then all of a sudden you're in Testament and you're peeling insane riffs onto the Lamb of God record. It had to have felt good to just let it rip at that point because, you've been practicing restraint for 13 years.
Sure.
I have a theory, and I could be totally wrong, but every time I came upon, and excuse me for bringing this up, but I read it a few times in all my research, everywhere I turn, it's Testament, is considered the best non-Big Four thrash act. Now, that phrase annoyed me because I'm thinking from your perspective that's got to be like a backhanded compliment every time you read it. But my theory is that you guys being described that way in a consistent manner made you guys better and better and better as time went on. And that's not how bands are supposed to go. You and I know that.
Right. Exactly.
And do you think that played a part in you guys working harder and harder and getting more and more ferocious? Hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 4-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate podcast for music obsessives thrive. Now I need your help. Although Discograffiti is rated in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, the economics of this thing are tricky. My monthly income at the moment totals a whopping $760. Becoming a member of of Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to over 100 more episodes, and moving forward, you'll get up to 3 shows a week. There's the main show every Friday, Wednesday's brand new series, The Top 10, and Monday's wildcard episode, which could be anything from interview bonus material, our buried treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our slag off show, Queasy Listening, and exclusive limited series like The Private Press with Paul Major. And if you've got no financial worries to speak of, keep in mind that some of the higher Patreon tiers allow you to actually advertise on the show, choose the bands we cover, or even some of the guests we get. For the price of a cup of coffee a week, you can ensure my family's fed, build a music library that'll be the envy of your block, and connect to a thriving community of music maniacs all at the same time. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Once again, that's patreon.com/Discograffiti. And now back to our expertly crafted program.
Yeah, I think it was just circumstantial. Again, when the original lineup got back together in 2005, it was totally unexpected. It was because of this offer to play overseas. And there was no pressure. It was just we were going to have fun. And that was the first time the band was going to have fun. Because it wasn't fun during that first wave of the band, even though it probably looks fun from the outside. But there was just so much pressure to follow up one album with another, not being experienced, and just, finding ourselves, out in the music world and just not agreeing on how we should go about it. So by the time the band gets back together in the 2000s, there's no pressure. It's just, this is going to be fun. Chuck Billy had gone through this cancer battle.
Right.
The band, we'd all sort of gotten together, bonded together over that. That really helped bring everybody together as well. When Chuck was going through this, that was around 2000, 2001.
So is that what brought you in to do the re-recordings for First Strike, yes. Still Deadly? Okay.
Yeah.
So really that was the prelude to the promoter coming in. That kind of rolled out the carpet for that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That was right around that time. I mean, Chuck was starting to get better at that point.
Yeah.
So First Strike, Still Deadly happened. Then a few years later, the offer to do the live show. Yeah, the show led to more shows. The show went well. We got more offers. We spent a couple years just getting these occasional offers to play a few times a year. But it started increasing. Then, it was, instead of just an occasional weekend, it would be a week here and there. And then the big offer, the offer that really changed everything, was a tour called the Metal Masters Tour. It was Motorhead, Heaven and Hell, basically Black Sabbath with Dio singing, and Judas Priest. And they needed an act to kick off that show. And if we would have a new album, Testament could take that tour. So that was a big moment of reckoning. Like, we really had to have a big talk. Okay, can we do this? Are we ready to do this? So the original drummer, Louis Clemente, was not ready to do it. He's not a player when he's outside of the band. He was a guy who played well when he was in the band, but otherwise he just wouldn't play. And the whole time he'd been out of the band, he'd pretty much been out of music. John Tempesta was supposed to be the drummer. He got hired by the Cult, and it ended up being Paul Bostaff. And the album was called The Formation of Damnation. And by then, just doing an album at that point, after all that we'd been through, it was a completely different experience. So
how so? I'm also curious if it was hard to re-summon the perspective to get back into that mind frame. I mean, did it feel, when you first stepped into the studio, were you a little bit afraid that it would feel like a young man's game, or were you able to easily access that spirit and energy to get you back in there?
It came naturally.
Okay.
We knew we sounded good together. By that time, those guys had been through so many musicians. The lineup was constantly changing. And they recognized that, especially with Eric and I playing guitars, that was pretty irreplaceable. So we were excited, and we realized, we can do this. We can do a record. I had worked with other artists at that point. I'd been in the studio so many times, both as a session player and just doing my own albums. Yeah, it was very different than those first few albums where it was just such a new, scary experience. So, and it wasn't perfect. Obviously, there would be disagreements. There would obvious things to work out, but it wasn't like before.
It's my favorite album of yours up to that point. My favorite
cool.
Testament record. As an outsider, I just felt like it was particularly punishing. Like if I'm going to listen to that, I want to be kicked in the throat. Like Husker Du's records, like there's a total absence of bass on it. And so I'm kind of kicked in the forehead. I want to be kicked a little bit lower.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if this is something that you guys have explored, because a lot of your lyrical conceits are sort of located externally, the political or conspiratorial. So I went to school for film. I've made 2 feature films. I make horror movies. And,
cool.
Metal and horror, they're very, very similar. You have these, cartoonish expressions of, real, serious, depressing, horrifying things. And then as you get older, like you and I talked earlier about taking care of your parents, that kind of stuff. And, I've been through a ton of medical stuff. The real horror comes out, and then the signifiers that you and I both play with in our separate artistic pursuits, they take on a whole new thing where it's not a cartoon anymore. And then the work can become truly 3-dimensional. And I feel like perhaps you guys have not made that record yet, or you're not interested in making it, but I would love to hear that record where you connect the outside with the inside, because when you integrate, like you did with Alex Skolnick Trio's Goodbye to Romance, when you have assimilated and integrated your influences, it's a chills down the spine thing. To me, that's why it's my favorite of your records, because, man, are you having your cake and eating it too? I mean, this is like, you and I texted briefly about it, and I don't know if it holds the same importance to you as you look back over the so many records that you've released. Is it a special one for you? Like a really special one? What's the 1 or 2 or 3 that really hang with you?
Oh, well, it's always the next one.
Yeah.
And I do have one recorded. It's not mixed yet, but I'm pretty excited about it. I feel like it's a breakthrough record in a lot of ways. It doesn't even have a title yet, so we'll talk about that when it's out.
Which band is that? Is that Alex Skolnick Trio?
It's Alex Skolnick Trio, yeah.
Sweet. For those who don't know what Goodbye to Romance is, it encapsulates your goals with the trio, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Which is, these sort of bop renditions of classic rock and metal tunes, right?
Yeah. Well, it was a statement in a lot of ways.
It's a total statement.
Yeah. And it was also my way of showing that I have something to say outside of being pigeonholed as the thrash guy, not rejecting.
That's the crucial part. You could have done
respect. Yeah.
You could have done a whole different thing where you're like, fuck it, I'm just going off on Flights of Fancy. But no, Detroit Rock City, Dream On, Goodbye to Romance, Pinball Wizard, War Pigs, and then your originals are as good as all these other songs.
Oh, thank you. They
really are.
Yeah, it was just a way of sort of tying together where I'd come from and where I was going. It just felt right. In some ways, it was something that was crazy. I could see somebody looking at it and thinking, I'm crazy. Like, why am I playing an archtop guitar, this elegant instrument with F-holes, mostly clean tone that you would call jazz guitar, and I'm not doing, an instrumental shred record or a more metal version of a Satriani record, which I'd been asked to do by, some prominent labels that do that type of stuff. And it just wasn't in me. It's just not what I do. I wasn't feeling it. So I did what I was feeling, as crazy as it is. And that's how that record came together. So I think I play better now. I'm a better arranger. I'm a better producer. But the record, it still sounds good to me.
It's gorgeous.
I feel like everything I do now is certainly tied back to that record.
It's your mission statement. In a lot of ways, it feels like your mission statement.
Exactly.
And for all I know, you hear Otis Redding singing, you think, oh my God, he's got to be really feeling that. But maybe he was just hitting the notes. But you sound like you're feeling something here. I don't know what you were going through at the time, but whatever it was, these tracks are suffused with emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. Yeah. And I think maybe, somebody that doesn't get that type of music or would rather hear me do pure metal shred, maybe they're not going to get it as much. But a lot of folks do get it. People who might not have been aware of me before. And that, to me, that's more important.
Ever wondered what your favorite bands talk about after the gig on the long van ride between Reno and Salt Lake City? Do you miss having in-depth conversations about music with your closest friends, picking apart why some songs are good and why some miss the mark completely? Do you read every inch of the available liner notes and still shake a fist at the clouds yelling for more? Damn it, more? If any of this sounds familiar, 1001 Album Complaints is the podcast for you. Every week, musicians and close friends give irreverent but informed takes on a new classic album pulled randomly from the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. The hosts do extensive research telling the stories behind your favorite records and helping you better understand how songs, both great and terrible, were conceived and built from the ground up. In short, it's a deep dive with lots of laughs. So if you want to sound informed and funny when talking about music, I recommend you follow or subscribe to 1001 Album Complaints right now. It's available everywhere. And then even your approach with the trio starts to funnel outwards. You know, with Last Day in Paradise in 2007, you're bringing in some funk underpinnings. And then on Western Sabbath Stomp, it's the first dose of blues-based rock that you'd assimilated back into the jazz-based work.
Yeah. Because at that point, I felt like, all right, I've proven I can play clean.
Yeah.
And, the type of sound that was on the majority of the trio songs at that point, okay, I had done that. I really felt safe to bring in some different sounds. So why not this crunchy sound, definitely inspired by Black Sabbath, but a little bit bluesier. Yeah, I mean, since then, I'm pretty comfortable trying anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a certain thing.
Is it scary when you do something new all the time or no?
No, I wouldn't say it's scary because, anything is worth trying.
Yeah.
But I only want to put it out as a release and then play it live if I'm really feeling it. And if the guys in the band are really feeling it. Sometimes it doesn't work. That's a song that easily might not have worked because it's so different from what we were doing, but it really did. They came up with the bassist, Nathan, and the drummer, Matt. They came up with great parts for it. Yeah, every now and then I'll hear it or somebody will ask me about it. It was recently suggested to be played on at a performance. I don't think we're going to do it, but it's sort of on the back burner. And I re-listened to it and it is really cool and really different.
Yeah, it is. It is. I like how, my favorite thing about your trio is that it could have just been entirely just the other side of the fence, but you broadened your approach to where you built a bridge back into Testament.
Yeah.
It was just like a magic trick. It's awesome.
Kind of. It's true. And that song was right before or right around that time that Testament was starting up again. And we didn't know it was starting up again because it was about 3 years before the formation of Damnation. And then things really started. Then we're regularly going to Japan once a year. We're going to Europe during the summer and all these festivals that had sprung up in the meantime.
And it feels like 2012 to 2014 was a particularly busy time for you where you felt like, I don't know if you felt like it, but it certainly looks based on your activities that things were coming to a serious head. You had the Testament record, you had your book, Geek to Guitar Hero, and then you had Planetary Coalition, which we got to talk at length about. But those three things together, that must have jogged a whole lot of things loose inside you.
Sure. Yeah, well, these were all things on my radar that I wanted to do and didn't know if I would get around to them. Yeah, a Planetary Coalition was something I always knew I had at least one world music album in me. I probably have more, but it's just a matter of time.
Let me read this. Your description of it is wonderful. So I just want people to know, when you say world music, people might think of one region, but let me be explicit here. It features musicians from all over the world driven by acoustic guitar and bringing together inspirational melodies, in-depth improvisation, and the passion of the musical styles of Gypsy, Middle Eastern, Indian, Latin, East Asian, Mediterranean, Balkan, Eastern European, African, and other indigenous lands. So when you say world music, it is almost literally a trip around the world.
Yeah, it ended up being that. I wasn't sure how it would go. I thought I will have at least a few artists from different regions. There were a select few artists that I knew I could get. At that point, Rodrigo y Gabriela were having all this success. They had taken the trio out on some tour dates. They also had me guest on one of their records. It's called 1111. So I knew I'll be able to get Rodrigo y Gabriela. They're so wonderful. They're still good friends. While I was touring with them, we did a show at Radio City Music Hall, and they flew in this group based in France. They're actually originally Palestinian citizens, originally based there, but they mostly perform in Europe now, and they live in Paris, called Trio Gibran. They're amazing. And we hit it off. I was able to get one of them, Adnan Gibran.
He plays oud?
He plays oud, yeah. So there's two right there. And then there's a group called House of Waters that are really good friends of mine, and they're actually really starting to rise in stature. They do a lot of shows now with the group Snarky Puppy. That's now a Grammy-winning kind of global phenomenon. But this was before that. We just had some mutual musician friends that introduced me to them, and I realized they could be the foundational group on this album. So I figured, okay, I'll have some songs that are sort of small ensemble collaborations or duos, like the song with Anad Gibran, the song with Rodrigo Gabriela, that's just them and me. And there's a few others like that, where it's just me and one other person. But the vast majority, it's me and this group, House of Waters.
And you're using tons of different guitars as well, right?
Yeah. The more I worked on this, the more inspired I got to just try different musicians, different instruments. I went a little crazy. I mean, it's the equivalent of a double album.
Yeah, it's like 70 minutes.
Yeah, there's a musician from every continent except for Antarctica. And,
you'll have to do an Antarctica only sequel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was also inspired by Ry Cooder.
Oh, cool.
Ry Cooder's got these great albums with artists from the Middle East and different countries, and they tend to be very specific. Like Buena Vista is very specifically Cuban.
Right.
I just thought, okay, I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to do this. Instead of it being one specific thing, let me just do a different track with, a different artist from a different place. Yeah, that's how that album came together. And very proud of that one.
Yeah, it's a major work. It sounds like a lot of work went into it.
It was a lot of work went into it. It kind of has a cult following too. There are
for good reason.
Fans, that come up to me that are just that listen to that album constantly.
Yeah, and I feel like your work in this area is probably not done.
Yeah, I would like to think so.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it would be.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that was right before you joined a heavy metal supergroup.
Right, yes. Oh, yeah.
Of course. So Metal Allegiance is awesome. Again, the figuring out of how to properly present your stuff so you're hit in the appropriately hard way. It's pummeling and really, really good. So you're with David Ellefson, Mike Portnoy, and Mark Mengi. Is that right?
Yeah.
Really good stuff. I know they have 2 albums and an EP. Are you just on the self-titled one?
I'm on all the recordings.
Okay, so as things kind of get more recent, is Azusa the last thing that you released? Your lead guitar work on Detach and Testament's Titans of Creation, is that the last thing you've done that was released?
Yeah, I played on a track by an artist named Laszlo Jones from Europe. It's weird in a good way. It's kind of danceable club music.
That's interesting. You definitely haven't gone there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was just a guest track.
By the way, on Conundrum from 2018, your trio record, your rendition of Satij Janapati 1 is so beautiful. I mean, I've heard a million versions of it, and your torch song, brush drumming, undergirding it, the take on it is very, very emotionally moving.
Oh, thank you. I've done some other guest tracks too. So I played on an album by Dave House, Hause.
That was recent?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, I think, last year, which is kind of Americana.
Oh, cool.
Almost country. It's probably the most country recording I've done.
Do you have any country underpinning?
Not really. I mean, I like some. Yeah, I have a few licks I use. I did a track called Culture Shock. That's on Conundrum, where it's very Nashville flavored, and I use a Telecaster on part of it. But it's never been my main thing, and I know there's people who really specialize in that.
Coming up, where do you see your focus? Is it still going to be wherever the hell you want to put it on any given day, or do you feel yourself being pulled in a specific direction?
I get pulled depending on what's going on. One more guest track. Mike Zito, he's a great blues artist, award-winning blues artist, actually. He did a tribute album of Chuck Berry songs. A lot of great guests on it. Joe Bonamassa is a guest on that.
Sure. Is there any genre that you don't like?
Oh,
There's got to be one, right? Well, you've been working with scratching, so that's hip hop.
yeah, no, I definitely like hip hop.
Is there any genre where you're gonna draw the line? K-pop?
It depends what it is. I guess I'm not a big fan of music that feels mechanical to me.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of drum machine and computers in hip hop, especially some of the hip hop that I like, it doesn't feel mechanical to me. For some reason, you know what I mean? It makes me groove. So I have no problem with that. There is, though, like a lot of the top pop streaming songs these days feels very mechanical. Like the stuff that could be, they're worried that AI is going to copy it because it's so easy to copy and so mechanical.
It'll probably have more feeling when done by AI.
Yeah, exactly.
This podcast is definitely a get off my lawn type of podcast. So, yeah, it'll be falling on empathetic ears for sure.
It's not like I can't find any new pop music to like.
Yeah.
Like some of Billie Eilish's music is quite unique. I think her voice is really unique.
Yeah.
Miley Cyrus, I can't pretend I'm a big listener, but I respect that she's done stuff like guesting with Metallica, having David Byrne guest with her on her New Year's Eve show.
What's the most non-metal, like if you're jean jacket wearing metal fans, if they knew you liked a certain artist, what would be the most surprising one? Already you've shredded everyone's expectations and conceptions about you, so nothing would be truly surprising, but what would be the most?
I don't know, classic country. Patsy Cline, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Country metal.
I don't know if I would that surprise anybody at this point?
At this point, no. But I just, like if you never left Testament, what would be the most surprising? But you definitely left Testament. And thank God you did, because you brought so much back into the band.
I mentioned Mike Zito. That was the blues artist, I guess. And that wasn't that long ago. And you'd asked what I'm working on. I'm about to go to Estonia to teach. Stu Ham has a music camp. It's mostly bass students, but I'll be teaching. I'll be one of a couple guitar players there. But I'm getting ready for that, learning the music. One of the bass teachers is Mohini Day. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's like the current super hot shot bass player, like a Victor Wooten or a Stanley Clark, but female and from India, incorporating all this crazy Indian rhythm into her music. So I'm learning one of her tracks. It's just insane. And
when did you start teaching?
After leaving Testament, I mean, for a few years, I was local, and that was what I did. I would teach locally, but also I started getting invited to these music camps pretty early on. One of the classic ones is called National Guitar Summer Workshop. That would take place every summer. So every other year or so, I would go and be part of that faculty. I think that was probably early 90s.
Also the G4 with Joe Satriani, right?
Yeah, no, I've done a couple of those. That's been a more recent thing, but I did his 2018 version of that, which was a huge honor. That had Eric Johnson and Steve Vai and Mike Keneally. The most recent one was just insane. This year, back in January, there was Steve Lukather, Steve Morse, John Five, Eric Gales, some younger players like Mateus Asado, Corey Wong. Too many to name, but it was just an insane lineup. I love doing those.
Do you think you gravitated towards doing that in a sort of backwards way to deepen your relationship with your parents?
Oh, that's interesting. But definitely not consciously.
But has it had that effect?
Probably, yeah. I mean, they can certainly relate to that, being professors. And I think once I started getting invited to give master classes and then writing guitar columns for guitar magazines, which I did in the 90s for Guitar World and Guitar for the Practicing Musician. I've written for Guitar Player too. That was relatable. Mm-hmm. There's a certain respectability to writing in a magazine. And also, I think once I did my own recordings and it was the trio, and it was just much more listenable and relatable. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it was certainly, there wasn't the goal of impressing my parents, but it was, I won't lie, it felt good to say they really enjoyed the record.
I don't care who you are. You want to hear your mom and dad say, I love you, and I get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't care who you are. You know, we're very, very simple beings. I know I am. The older I get, the more I realize I'm not nearly as complicated as I thought I was when I was younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So I have 3 questions here in the Discograffiti mailbag. So Hannah Christine Nicholson from the Alex Skolnick Trio group asks, when is his jazz trio putting out the new record? I'm eager as holy hell to hear it.
Okay. Well, it is recorded. We're about halfway through 2023. So unfortunately, if you release an album anytime after the summer, it very quickly becomes last year's album.
Right.
So it just doesn't make sense to release it this year. So I'm looking at most likely spring of 2024. And in the meantime, I'm probably going to put out a song or 2 as a single/video.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait, man. All right. Donald Haynes from Thrash Metal Fans asks, I was wondering if Alex still uses Heritage and Ibanez guitars.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I started out on Ibanez guitars, at least, well, from the time of the second Testament recording, The New Order. But I was such a new kid on the scene. I didn't really know that that guitar I was playing was going to inspire like other people to play that type of guitar. As I evolved in my musical tastes and as a composer and musician, my taste in guitars changed too. So I still like my Ibanez's, but I don't play them live. And the same with the Heritages. I have the Heritages at home, and I'll still play them at home, but I rarely play them out. But I still enjoy them and still use them.
All right, last question here is Eric Butte from the Testament Disciples of Thrash Group. It says, fans since seeing Legacy at Ruthie's. And his question is, you mostly have a female fan base, lots of dreamy drawings of you guys on your Facebook page. How does that feel at this stage of your career? FYI, I don't see drawings of Exodus or Death Angel with big eyes and flowing hair.
Oh, that's funny.
At first, I thought, well, that's kind of a rude question. But actually, if I sense any kind of arc here in your work, and I'm way more curious about how you see it than how I do, it's an arc that incorporates a certain kind of self-effacement that has made you a better and better and better guitarist. So yeah, those dreamy drawings, I am actually curious how that feels.
Oh, it's nice. It's flattering. I wouldn't say that's the majority of our fan base. I would say it's probably more male than female, but the fact that there is a portion that is female and they're inspired to do drawings, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's very flattering, and it's nice to know that we're not limiting our listenership.
Usually I write up an overview, a little piece about what I've gleaned from taking in the interview subject's material. You have a ton of albums. I listened to so much music in preparation for this, and I have my own conceptions, but what do you see? Over time.
I definitely see a lot of evolving and self-discovery, unpredictability.
Yeah.
I think at a certain point I realized, no 2 people are exactly the same. The guitarists that I grew up idolizing, Randy Rhoads, Eddie Van Halen, and so forth. Later, Pat Metheny and John Scofield, Al Di Meola. So everybody just has such a different trajectory and a different life. You can't plan anything. And even though, you may be inspired by a certain player, in the end, it's your story and it's going to write itself. I think I'm proud that my story doesn't look like anybody else's.
Yeah, it really doesn't, that I've come across. It's been a blessing for me to take it all in, really. And
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
I have my top 3 records, but hysterically enough, it's probably not going to mirror most of the people who would be listening to the show, which is kind of great. My number 3 is Alex Skolnick Trio's Conundrum. Number 2 is Planetary Coalition. And number 1 is Alex Skolnick Trio's Goodbye to Romance. Truly a masterpiece. I mean,
thank you so much, man. It's great to hear. It's great to hear somebody else's perspective on all this.
It's beautiful. To hear you go from Testament to that stuff, that's what tells a story. That's what makes doing the show a continuous process of discovery. Because had I not known that, had I not known your work, it's easy to be reductive towards somebody's capabilities or their career.
Yes, exactly. Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad that side is appreciated.
Absolutely. And, for the sleeve of your book, which describes, this lonely, awkward kid who, grabbed onto metal as a buoy so as not to drown, you sound very, very comfortable in your own skin. And it's great to see that metal and jazz can do that.
Thank you. Yeah. It took a long time to realize that it's okay to do that, even though it seemed like an odd thing at one point in time. Nowadays, it's not as odd, but at one time, the idea of somebody seriously pursuing jazz and heavy metal was unthinkable.
Yeah. You definitely gained a fan here, man.
Thanks, man. Oh, I appreciate it.
All right, that about does it. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Rudy Fishman, the great Alex Skolnick, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the soldiers of sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the bone-crunching pleasures of metal is to dive headfirst into Jim Florentine from That Metal Show, rating Black Sabbath in a massive 5-hour interview split into 4 episodes. That's 64, 65, 67, and 68. Then there's my interview with No Age's Randy Randall. That's episode 88, as well as Randy rating the Jesus Lizards catalog in a 2-parter, that's 70 and 71, and finally, our legendary Van Halen episode number 9. Join us during the upcoming week as we descend down, down, down on Discograffiti's week-long Alex Skolnick Part 2 deep dive. Of course, if you're a Patreon subscriber, then you already know to keep your ears peeled throughout the week, because this Monday brings a heapin' helping of the wildcard episode digressions I actively court and serve up piping hot for our Patreon family. And by the way, it's free to join now. You don't actually have to pay to be a part of Patreon. This Monday, you can finally trust that day, because we're coming at you with Fillmore Feast Part 6, the finale of Allan Arkush's incredibly popular series. And then there's this Wednesday's incredible Patreon-only episode of Discograffiti's The Top 10. This week's list features the indomitable Joe Kennedy and focuses on our top 10 suicidal music career decisions. And the episode came out so damn good that I've decided to offer it up free of charge this Wednesday, so don't miss it. That's 2 free episodes this week. What have you done for me lately? Speaking of, make sure you visit patreon.com/discograffiti and check out the thematically related deep dive as a music obsessive's way of life. Our Patreon's been up and running for a year, and with 2 episodes a week coming at you, there are now over 100 Patreon episodes at this point. That's an entire universe of indispensable music podcasts available to you for the price of a cup of coffee a week. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, December 8th, which is my son's 5th birthday, we're coming at you with Mike motherfucking Watt, rating the entirety of the Minutemen's output. 3 solid weeks of Watt means a heavenly December for our subscribers. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!